Hi, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to another edition of Half Hour on the Hill. I have former State Senator Pam Resor, someone who was a mentor to me, both in my time growing up in Acton and looking to run for public office. And Pam, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Jamie. It's a pleasure.
I see you from time to time, usually at environmental events.
Yes.
And I know you're still very active on that. And just really wanted to have a chance to talk about sort of your public service career. And I think I've mentioned before that I think the first time I met you, I was at an Eagle Scout ceremony when I was in high school.
Yes.
And you were a state representative.
Or senator, which was I mean, actually probably selectman.
Probably as a selectman. Yes,
That's
exactly.
True.
Yep. And so yeah, it was probably a selectman, and so that was sort of, I think, the first time I met an elected official growing up in Acton. Mm-hmm. And just wanted to sort of have you maybe reflect a little bit, or curious, sort of, living in Acton with your husband Griff, raising your kids, and just sort of curious how you got your start in public service in Acton.
Well, we moved here in 1966 after my husband finished business school and brought up 3 children. Shortly after we moved here, I had finished college, and my mother-in-law said to me, you really should get involved in the League of Women Voters, because that's a group of people that you will enjoy and share a lot, have a lot in common. Mm-hmm. So I joined that very early on, and finally in the 1980s, mm-hmm. became the president, in 1970s actually.
Okay.
Became president
of the Acton League or the state?
League.
Okay.
Acton.
Okay.
Yeah,
yep.
I did some work for the state on water issues, but
okay.
I did not go into the higher offices. But I enjoyed very much working with the Acton League. And one of the things that happened, of course, at just about that time was mm-hmm. the whole W.R. Grace, the discovery of the pollution of 40% of our town water supply.
Sure.
On the W.R. Grace property.
And that was the 1970s or early 80s?
Mid to late 70s.
Okay, okay.
And so at that point, the league had a meeting. We had some speakers come in from mm-hmm. DEP and talk to us a bit about water issues, and we got mm-hmm. quite concerned about it. And when I finished my presidency, I decided to go on the Board of Health, because I thought that would be where you would work on water issues.
Yeah.
However, almost everything was done by the Board of Selectmen, so then mm-hmm. it required running for elective office, which I had never thought about doing before. But there were 5 candidates and 2 open seats.
Okay, and, which is pretty competitive. Most municipal races are not that competitive
not
these days.
Not that much anymore, that's
yeah.
right. So, and I did get elected and spent 2 terms, 6 years on
mm-hmm.
the board.
And addressing W.R. Grace, including the lawsuit, the
that's
cleanup.
Correct. We had hearings. We had, we had the incident where the air was polluted by the escape of some of the gases in South Acton, and we all were called in the middle of the night to say, mm-hmm. just wanted you to be aware, and they said, don't come over here, but
yeah. And W.R. Grace, I mean, so it was found by some people walking through the woods, or some kids who found the contamination.
Well, that was certainly a piece of it, but they began testing water in the mid-70s, testing well water supplies in communities much more
mm-hmm. Was this from the Clean
intensive.
Water Act?
I believe it probably was.
Yeah, okay.
Although it was a state department, I believe, that did the testing, not the federal. So they discovered that there were some organics in there that they were concerned about, and
mm-hmm.
so volatile organics.
Right.
And don't ask me to name them anymore. Used to be able to do that, but methyl, whatever.
We'll just stick with volatile organics.
Right, exactly.
And so there was. Is that when ACES was founded, or
just about that time?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So Charlotte Sagoff, Bob Whittlesey,
Evelyn Olszewski, and there was a whole group of people who really wanted to both keep the selectmen and the state and federal groups paying close attention to it.
Right, some accountability
not let
and
anything
focus.
slip. So.
Were you interested in environmental protection before then, just as a value, or was that sort of what drew you to the issue, or?
I was definitely interested in environmental issues and appreciation long before that.
Yep.
But I did not study any of that in school or anything of that sort.
Yeah.
My major at the Smith College was in sociology and education.
And so you served 2 terms in the Board of Selectmen, and then ran for state rep while you were a selectman, or later?
No,
or?
actually, after the 2 terms on the board, my husband started his own business. And for a couple of years, I needed to have some income.
Okay.
And so I was working as the executive director of the Mass Association of Conservation Commissions.
Oh, sure.
So it also gave me both a broader perspective and more information about environmental issues, and more contacts through all the communities. And
Right,
so
outside of just Acton. Yeah.
And it wasn't a planned effort to become elected, but it worked well.
That's great. And then you decided to run and did take on an incumbent.
In 1988, the local Democrats came in and asked me if I would run.
That's wonderful.
And they asked several other people too, so we had several candidates that year.
Yep. And you served how many terms in the House of Representatives?
I served 4.5, because at the halfway point of my 5th term is when Senator Duran announced that he was stepping down.
Sure. And when you were in the House, what was the environmental legislation that you were most focused on?
Well, the one I was working hardest on for the whole time was the Rivers Protection Act.
Yes.
Which had a lot of stumbling blocks, a lot of things that kept it from going through each year. So.
Yeah.
And there were several others. There's one that you have now, the one on public lands protection, which we had a different name from that point. But and changes in zoning. I worked with a whole group for the time I was both in the House and Senate.
Which is still a challenge.
Which is still a challenge. And then I worked on a number of other issues other than environmental issues too. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you worked on many issues.
Particularly women's issues and education issues.
Yep. And on the environmental front, what was, as a legislator, what was the level of support or awareness about environmental protection at that time in the legislature?
It was actually, in the legislature.
Yeah.
Not so good.
Yeah.
In our communities, it was excellent.
Yeah.
So it was a strong, there was strong support for it in both my House seat region and Senate district. So.
Yeah, because I know one of the challenges we still face now is the proper funding of the DP, our state parks, the Department of Ecological Restoration. They still really haven't recovered from the cuts of the 2000s. So
I'm glad you mentioned the state parks, because that was one I worked a lot on and still needs some attention.
Yeah.
We have a most amazing state park system in this Commonwealth, and really has so much potential, and they really understaff, and people are not able to use it to some extent because there's not enough staff to oversee it.
I mean, there's state parks where there's no rangers, there's no staff people, there's limited hours, there's not upkeep of the parks.
Right. So I think that one needs some more.
Yep.
Either a citizens group or somebody needs to really take that on. So.
Yeah, we're still trying to get to 1% of the state budget being dedicated to environmental issues. So I think we're at 0.6%.
Right.
And I know now you serve on the board of the Mass Rivers Alliance.
That's correct.
And I think one of the things I've been trying to sort of analyze is that, the 70s you had the Clean Water Act pass, you had the creation of the EPA at the federal level that really made great strides in cleaning up our rivers, that were so polluted. There's stories of the Nash River. Every day there would be a different
color
from the paper mills.
And we remember that when we first moved here. So
yeah. And people, or at least animals, being able to walk across some of the rivers because they were so.
That one I hadn't heard, but I believe it.
And so that was done, but obviously there's still challenges. Our rivers still aren't fully clean, and how do we get to that next level of getting to our rivers where we can swim in them and fish and better able to use them for recreation? I mean, is it just more investment, or is it stronger environmental laws, or?
It's probably both, but we do have some recent laws that are definitely will strengthen and improve it, and particularly dealing with the runoff from properties that are developed in our more developed urban areas. And our cities and towns are all working to try and meet the regulations and
stormwater regulations.
And runoff planning. And I think that will help a great deal. But I'm sure that there are continuing issues that we need to deal with in terms of new legislation.
Yeah.
One of the pieces that I worked on, the mercury piece, still hasn't been implemented, and so I think there are definitely issues that would help improve the quality of our rivers.
Yeah.
We have used our rivers for so long. First with all the paper mills and things of that sort.
Industrial Revolution.
Industrial Revolution. And then more recently, of course, with septic treatment plants running, and as you well know, the Assabet is almost all effluent in certain times of the year.
And there's other rivers like the Merrimack where, at times raw sewage is being dumped in there when the flooding happens.
And that's another good bill that's before you. So the notification, because people are not told when that happens, and certainly for people who want to use the river in any way, and just as a right to know public awareness, I think we need to have legislation. So
one of the conflicts I sometimes see, though, is where you have town governments, often town managers, in some cases water districts, that are focused on sort of delivering inexpensive water to the residents or keeping water rates low, and so there's not as much environmental activism as many people would think that town officials or water districts would have.
That has long been a problem.
Yeah.
And the efforts over the past to try and limit how much water each individual within a town and the town as a whole uses have faced a lot of unhappy people because they want to water their lawns, I guess.
Right, yeah.
And learning what things they can plant that wouldn't need as much water, or even just, nothing bothers me more than going past someplace and it's raining and their water...
The sprinklers on,
right? So I think awareness and a real cost to water. We have long talked about how you could determine what water really should cost, because it's been too easy, it's been too inexpensive, and yet everyone needs it, and you don't want to price it so that poor people have difficulty paying for it. So
and I think now in ACT, it's sort of an Acton Concord Littleton issue, is the Nagog Pond and withdrawing the water versus conserving it for the region, and who knows best about what's proper for the future of Nagog Pond.
We could get into that one. I have some fairly strong opinions. I personally believe it's some risk to have a surface water supply.
Yes.
And that Concord has 3 rivers that flow into it. And I suspect that their potential for well water is much higher than ours. In Acton. These are dangerous things to get into.
But you're not elected now, so it's okay.
But I certainly, that's a long-standing agreement, and it's not going to be easy to change.
Right, and it goes back to, I think, an 1880 law about the water being shared in cases of emergency.
Did it say emergency? Because if it said emergency, I'm not sure it did.
I'll double check the law.
Yeah.
On the W.R. Grace front, I mean, there's still, there's still concerns about the plume continuing to, make its way to the aspect about the cleanup. What is your take on the, now 40-plus year cleanup of what W.R. Grace did to Acton and to its residents?
Well, there's several ways to look at it. We certainly made more progress than some communities have been able
Absolutely.
to make on their pollution. W.R. Grace fought it every inch of the way.
Yeah. I mean, Acton was really the first town in the country to win major victories against the company.
I guess so, although the company never agreed to admit anything. They just had the consent decree.
Right.
But that
Right.
at least allowed them to go ahead with it, and so it possibly was the best solution. And there are so many, both in W.R. Grace and in nuclear metals, to remove the pollutants and take them somewhere else doesn't always make sense.
Sure.
If you look at the overall national issues and water quality and things of that sort. So they're really difficult issues. I think we did come out quite well. As you say, there is the plume still, and I think that the major thing they have to do is not start withdrawing water until they have that
right.
solved.
Yeah, and those wells still aren't accessible.
Right.
Yeah. The issue that has been on the front page of the Boston Globe and some of the local papers, including the district that you once represented and now I represent, is the PFAS issue. And so now they're finding it in Devens from the military base, and in Hudson from a company that puts solvents on products. What is your take on sort of how to address that? Because there's some concern that is it how serious of an issue is it? How should it be studied? Is it federal government, state action? Residents in Hudson are now getting bottled water because of concerns over the hazards of drinking Hudson's public water supply.
Well, my personal feeling is that we really need to make them capture it in some enclosed way and process it before it's released. And I
So
think
water
all
treatment.
companies should be, required to do that.
Yeah, water treatment facility.
Yeah. It's once it gets into the groundwater, just as we've discovered with W.R. Grace, it's really much harder to pull it out and make a change. I think one of the problems in this country has always been that companies are you have to prove that it's going to do damage. You have to prove that that there's a problem before they will take any financial responsibility
so the
and action.
damage is incurred on people's health and lives.
Exactly. And then you can't prove that it did the damage to the individual frequently, and so I think it's something that we just haven't learned, and I know there are countries that do a better job of it, Sweden and some of the European countries.
Right, most European countries. And I know that's another issue you took a leadership role in, is the Toxic Use Reduction Act.
Right, precautionary principle.
Yes.
Yes, it's a principle that says, they have to prove that it's not going to hurt instead of you have to prove that it's going to hurt. And
And it really is scary that in this country, and in some respects this state, there are companies that create products with chemicals that aren't, for the most part, tested to see if they're safe.
Right.
Yeah.
The other things they're finding more and more of in our water is the little nanoparticles that they're using in various toothpastes and other
plastics.
products. And
Yep.
And I think in the long run we're going to be very sorry that has happened, but
So that's sort of a major change that would need to happen in this country as far as changing that standard for how chemicals are analyzed.
And I don't see that coming.
Yeah. Maybe at the state level.
Keep
we'll see.
banging our heads against it. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know whether the state has, Governor Baker is certainly taking a more serious look at climate. Well, at least he's talking the talk. And, but overall, it would be wonderful if we could make the state example of, the best environmental protections that any state has. We have such opportunities because we have adequate water supply. We don't have to struggle for water all the time that some states do. So.
Yeah, I know sometimes there's tension with the Department of Environmental Protection, where sometimes there's a frustration that they're more focused on helping a business open, or being sort of being supportive of a business. Or approving, certain projects, and not focused on at least what I see as the mission of the DEP is environmental protection.
Right. And that's where the Toxic Use Reduction Institute could really be very useful.
Yeah.
And they have been, to some extent. They have really worked with companies to try and, solve some of those issues.
Absolutely.
But they need to get them involved before they start.
Exactly.
Polluting.
and need to be properly funded too. I mean, Turi is a entity within UMass Lowell that sort of survives and struggles year to year. So, but needs a lot more support. And I think it's also an area where it's an area where actually it can be part of the economy and create jobs. In Massachusetts, we have the academic institutions, we have environmental leaders, we have scientists that can do a lot of that work. Versus just sort of an obsession with development or producing certain products.
I think the value of being a leader in that way would be so high that I don't know why someone doesn't grab hold of that and move ahead on it. So.
And you're seeing that with clean energy now, where there's a recognition that there's far more clean energy jobs than obviously for Massachusetts oil or natural gas or coal there ever was. Many more clean energy jobs that are reliant on our educated workforce and our sort of history of being a very innovative state.
We move ahead on some issues, and then sometimes we kind of slip back on them. I noticed they're changing a few of the regulations that we worked hard on in terms of getting using the wood.
The wood burning.
Burning.
Yes, the pellets.
And things of that sort. Air quality seems good, but all we need is a week or two of inverted air, and we'd be in trouble again. So
exactly.
It just seems like they're always looking for the best business options. But
and you have all the corporate interests behind
and
that.
I certainly, we need that too.
Yep.
And I think that they can coexist. We just need the right mental attitude on what's important.
Exactly.
So.
And it's interesting you say that because, especially as the presidential race is beginning, oftentimes it's said that the environment is not a top issue or value for Americans or for residents. And yet, the districts that we represented, whether a state representative or state senator, I think of the environment as the top issue. And yet often, whether you're talking about, governor's elections or presidential, it's not at the top. Are there things you think sort of politicians or activists need to do to better connect with sort of everyday voters to better prioritize the environment?
Certainly, but I think they've made a big effort, and there are people who simply are in denial. You would think in this year, with all of the tremendous flooding and storms and things that have hit the Midwest, the Midwest would just be out there saying we've got to do something about climate change, but
Absolutely.
It just doesn't happen.
And the heat waves and the forest fires and fires in California and other states. Yep.
So, I don't know what's the answer. I keep having hope that it's our youth, but
I agree.
we haven't always done that greater job of providing environmental education in our schools either. I think Massachusetts probably does a better job than some other states.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an area, having more environmental curriculum for our K through 12 schools is critical. And I think to the point of advocacy, the Mass Rivers Alliance really has made a tremendous difference to get legislators to focus on, how do we clean up the river through our community? How do we increase funding for the DEP? And I think that is, you're seeing a bit of a change that at the state level.
We've been very happy with the results, and I think, I appreciate that you have supported it.
Thank you.
And that you have worked hard on those issues. I know that some of your fellow state senators and representatives are less concerned about environmental issues, but it takes a constant reminder and talking about it to bring them along. It
really does, yeah. Well, I appreciate the fact that, upon your retirement, you remained involved with many important environmental causes. You've always been a mentor to me, and, really appreciate your guidance and leadership. And I just wanted to thank you for, your decades of work as a public servant on the environment and other areas. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And
thank you.
Pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the good work you do for this Senate district.
Thank you very much. So thank you for those who tune in for Half Hour on the Hill. My guest, former State Senator Pam Resor. Thanks for watching, and look forward to our next edition. Appreciate it.